Spirit Radio Podcasts.
Now, Dr. Anthony Levatino is an obstetrician gynecologist who used to carry out second trimester and late-term abortions in his clinic in New York State. He later abandoned this work when the death of his young daughter Heather led to him having a change of heart about the procedures he was doing. We played an interview with Dr. Levatino a couple of weeks ago about the film Unplanned, which is currently screening in Irish cinemas. And while doing that interview, our own Steve Johnson also talked to Dr. Levatino about the Irish situation with the introduction of abortion into our health system in January. And Steve is in audio to tell us more. First of all, Steve, what did you talk to Dr. Levatino about?
Well, I knew that he has experience of the abortion regime in the US, having worked there, in it for a number of years. But sure. I also knew that he had some familiarity with the Irish situation, given that he had been invited to speak, and he came to Ireland to speak in the Citizens' Assembly in the run-up to last year's referendum.
That's right, yeah.
So I just thought it was a great opportunity to ask him a couple of questions. And so, conscious of the change in culture in the Irish health system arising from last year's abortion legislation, I asked Dr. Levatino what he would say to young doctors and medical students in Ireland now, who might be concerned about their future careers, that their careers might be limited if they express conscientious reservations to being involved in abortions. And this is what he had to say.
Boy, that's a sticky subject. We see that to some degree here. It depends. Of course, there are hundreds of programs in which medical students ultimately become residents and get trained in obstetrics and gynecology, as well as now other programs. Remember, with medication abortions, you don't have to be an obstetrician gynecologist to get an abortion. Anyone who can write a prescription can do an abortion. And there are some medical students in some programs who are subjected to a lot of pressure to perform abortions. There's even something called the Ryan Project in our country, which is specifically funded to encourage students and residents to get involved in the abortion industry. The American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology that creates our training programs and certifies our training programs, in January of this year just created a new specialty called complex family planning. This is a euphemism for training late-term abortionists. So some students definitely do run into pressure. I would say to students, stick to your principles. It's a shame that abortion now is legal in Ireland. I spoke before the Citizens' Assembly. I understand the process that you all went through. But it's still new. And I think it's important for doctors, particularly important for doctors, to express what they think of the issue and encourage young physicians to just plain stay away. It's an interesting thing. As I said, I did abortions. My daughter died. That's what encouraged me to stop doing abortions. But I know a lot of doctors in the United States who were just as dedicated as I did, who ultimately left the abortion industry, just got to a point where they just had a belly full of killing. No one goes to medical school to learn how to kill. But that's exactly what this is.
That's a powerful statement. I was just thinking something very similar. Like, you don't go into, and particularly going into gyne-obs, you don't go into that you go into that to bring life. Don't you?
Yeah.
Even the fact that, people said, I went into gyne-obs because nobody's really sick most of the time. Mostly it's pretty happy, you don't.
Well, actually, as you remind me, for many years ago, I worked as an orderly when I was a student in Loughlinstown Hospital, and it had a maternity wing at the time. Yeah. And I just thought that it was the happiest place in the hospital. It was just lovely. Everyone was smiling. Yeah. It was just a lovely place to be. So, it is a nice place to work.
Absolutely. Can I just ask you a question around that? Like, he obviously talked about, students, and that's no doubt, the students are going to have, issues around, and they have their value system, and they don't want to, nobody goes into it to kill. But, I'm just thinking about when you've got your, you've got your training done, and then it's time for you to go and get a job. That's where I think you could really run into trouble, couldn't you? Because then that's because all it needs is one question in an interview going, would you be prepared to do an abortion?
Yeah.
If the answer to that is no, then you're kind of excluding yourself from that job.
Is it a career limiting decision?
Yeah.
And I think it's just a really burning question at the moment. I remember actually him being interviewed before, and he was said, that you can ask people in the street, what's their view on, are they pro-life or pro-choice? And it doesn't really matter what the answer in a way. But when he says when you're a doctor,
it makes a massive difference.
It's real. It means you've actually got to do something, and so when he went into it, and he considered himself pro-choice, so he did choose to carry out abortions. But he also said something there, just plain stay away, and his advice to young doctors, and that's problematic enough. And later on in the interview, you'll hear me, I suppose, bringing that up in a slightly different way. But I also just talked about him. I was interested, given his experience. He has a career obstetrician gynecologist. About talking to him, picking his brains on the risks in pregnancy. I was conscious that perhaps most people who voted yes in last year's referendum did so because they were concerned for the safety of women in pregnancy. So I asked him what he would say to them. I thought his response was interesting. It was nuanced, and it was quite measured.
Well, that becomes another controversial point. Elective abortion is one thing. And when this is promoted, we always hear about the, quote, hard cases. What if a woman is raped? What if she's pregnant as a result of incest? I could talk about this for an hour, and we don't have the time. But I will tell you, in my personal experience, during my practice, I performed just under 1,200 abortions in private practice after my training. And we very carefully counseled our patients ahead of time. Remember, we were in a private practice. We were not part of Planned Parenthood. We weren't part of a clinic. And I never wanted to be in a position where I was doing an abortion on someone who was being forced or coerced in some way. So we very carefully spoke with our patients and understood what their motivations were for abortion. Out of 1,200 abortions that I performed, only 2 had anything to do with rape and incest. As far, we hear about the life of the mother. Well, there are situations in pregnancy where a pregnancy has to be ended. If a woman has an ectopic pregnancy or a tubal pregnancy, you have to end that pregnancy to save her life. This is not an abortion. This is a separate type of procedure. But we have a lot of controversy going on even in our country about the, claims made all the time how abortion is necessary to save women's lives. This is overstated, and to the public that doesn't understand the fine points, it sounds very convincing. But the reality is that when pregnancy threatens a woman's life, and this can happen, pregnancy can be a very dangerous time for a woman. High blood pressure, cancers, toxemia, out of control heart disease. There are lots of reasons why a pregnancy might threaten her life. What we do is you end the pregnancy. That doesn't mean you end the baby. You just end the pregnancy. You do a delivery. And there are extremely rare circumstances where that would be necessary before that baby is capable of living outside the womb. And not every one of these, many of these babies are seriously premature. They don't all survive. But a large number of them do. And you work to give them every chance to live. And abortion plays almost no role, especially when you're talking about problems in pregnancy that occur after 20 weeks of gestation, after the halfway point. Because after now it varies depending on the level of care, but, even the World Health Organization states now that fetal viability starts at 22 weeks. That's 18 weeks premature. And babies even younger than that have survived on occasion. Having most of the serious problems that come in pregnancy come after viability's been achieved. And you treat them the old-fashioned way. You deliver the patient. You separate her and the baby and then give them both the care they need. Not every child will survive, but many of them will.
It's a real difference in philosophy, isn't it, the approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought it was helpful. He acknowledged, that there are dangers, but he just kind of said that, in my experience, abortion is not the solution.
The idea that you deliver the baby, and of course the baby may not survive after delivery, but that's not the same thing as intentionally. Ending that life. Is that the thing? Did he comment at all about the mechanics of the abortion regime in Ireland?
Yeah, well, it was sort of, as we were discussing, and particularly when he said plain stay away, his advice to young doctors, it was starting to dawn on me that he wasn't, that he was coming from the perspective of someone who had run a private abortion practice in the US and wasn't fully aware of how abortion is being sort of implemented in Ireland and embedded into the public health system. So I told him that in Ireland the government has proceeded with a GP-led abortion service, and asked him what he thought of this approach. I think his reaction, and particularly my need to clarify what I meant, was quite striking.
GP-led? Meaning your general practitioners?
That's right, yeah. They are treated as the front line, that the government wants all GPs, of course they haven't all agreed to it, but all GPs to be available to provide prescribed abortion pills. And so the Minister for Health wants that rolled out across the country, and the conscientious objection that GPs are permitted is that they do not have to perform the abortion, but they do have to refer to a GP that will provide the abortion. Now, obviously that's being contested, but that's the model that's being pursued in Ireland.
Wow. So it sounds to me, by promulgating this kind of rule, that your government has essentially made every general practitioner in the country of Ireland an agent of the state. Wow. How do the Irish people feel about that? How would you like to be forced to do something? Well, say you may not be a physician, but how would you like to be forced by your government to do something that you had an objection to? It's easy. Well, I just refer. Really? I in my career, I do not refer for abortions. Ever. Any more than, God. Imagine for a minute that a patient came to me, and forget legality for a minute, just think ethics and think morals. And a patient came to me and said, you know what, my 4-year-old it's just difficult. It's a pain taking care of her. She consumes so much of my time. She consumes so much of my money. She consumes so much of my effort. I just want to be rid of her. Could you please refer me to someone who would kill my daughter? You wouldn't even think of that. And I guess I said, ignore the legality. Obviously, that's grossly illegal. But ignore the legality of it. Just think of the morals and ethics involved. I and many, many other pro-life obstetrician gynecologists in my country will not refer for abortion. I will not, to me, referring personally. Referring a woman for abortion is no different than the situation I just discussed. Somehow my hands are clean because I send you to someone who will kill your child. I have serious difficulty with that. Many pro-life obstetrician gynecologists in this country do. It's a controversial point. There are some pro-life obstetrician gynecologists who will refer, and it's a matter of conscience. So far in the United States, no one is forcing us to do abortions, and no one is forcing us to refer. And the reason that hasn't happened, and despite this, and statements have come out of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, our professional organization in the state, implying that a doctor is unethical if they won't refer people for abortions. But no one, despite the fact that abortion has been legal here for, 46 years, has ever forced a physician to either perform or refer that procedure. So it seems to me that Ireland has jumped way ahead, and I question that as a serious breach of civil liberties. That's my opinion. Of course, I'm an outsider. I understand, but I find that shocking.
You know, it's funny listening to him there. It actually took him a couple of minutes to actually get his breath, because he was almost speechless at the idea that GPs would be forced into
to refer,
particularly against their value system. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't care what you believe, you're doing this, and the way he was able to say, and it was very clever thinking. Actually, imagine any other scenario under which you as a person would be forced by the state to do something that was completely against your conscience. It was amazing, but it took him. He really was. He was floored by your question.
He was percolating. It was dawning on him. I just thought his response was quite honest.
You asked him about abortion pills as well, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I said, following on that, the whole thing of it, a GP-led service. I asked him if he had concerns about abortion pills being prescribed to patients by GPs. When any training they've received would be very recent. It was only introduced in January, straight after the legislation was passed in December, and also where my understanding, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding, which is what I told him, is that GPs in general do not have ultrasound equipment, and this is his response.
Well, this would concern me greatly. Sure, anybody can write a prescription and say, here, take these pills. But when you initiate a procedure on a patient, whether it's medical or surgical, you have an ethical duty as a physician to care for any side effects or complications that occur as a result of your treatment of that patient. This is an absolutely rock solid law of medicine. Not a law, but it's our tradition, and it's the way things should be. Is a GP qualified to... What happens when a GP hands out pills and a woman begins to hemorrhage? Heavy bleeding does occur with medication abortions in a certain percentage of the cases, maybe 7 or 8%. What is the GP supposed to do? Oh, well, maybe he'll just dump her into an emergency room. That happens a lot here. Abortionists do abortions, but many of them refuse to have hospital privileges because they don't want to deal with the obligations that come with hospital privileges. So if their patients have complications, they simply dump them into emergency rooms, and then whoever happens to be the obstetrician gynecologist on call gets stuck taking care of that patient. And that patient's being cared for by a physician that she's never met, because she has no idea what their qualifications are. It is absolutely critical when a medication abortion is started that you are certain that that patient does not have an ectopic pregnancy. If patients have died in this country from using medication to try to initiate a medication abortion on a patient who had an ectopic pregnancy. And the only way I know of ruling out an ectopic pregnancy is to do an ultrasound. They're simply, we're talking in this point in this country of making these things over the counter. This discussion is going on. It has many levels, and it's a complex discussion. But I have serious concerns, because is the average general practitioner here, in Ireland or in the United States, really trained to take care of the complications that can and will occur when abortions are performed, either medically or surgically? If, someone, you don't have to be an obstetrician gynecologist, for instance, to learn to do first trimester suction D&C abortions. You could get the training and provide the service if you really want, but you darn well better learn how to take care of the complications, and as a matter of ethics, care for your patients when they come in bleeding or infected or perforated, and be prepared and ready to take care of those complications. I'm seriously concerned when I hear, well, it's no big deal. You're just going to hand out some pills. Oh, isn't that convenient? But what happens when something goes wrong? What happens to the patient? Who takes care of them? To me, it's unethical for a doctor to do that unless they have an existing transfer or referral arrangement with a physician who is skilled to provide the care. So if one of their patients then has a complication, well, you're going to see Dr. So-and-so who I've worked with and I trust, and he's going to take care of your problem, as opposed to simply dumping them into emergency rooms. And believe me, that's what's going to happen there, because that's exactly what's happening here.
Yeah, that's it's a fair point, isn't it?
Yeah. I was just even listening back to him there earlier on, kind of saying, what does Ireland think about that? About the situation we now have in the country, and I think there's probably a fair bit of going, what have we done? That sort of thing. That this is the arrangement now in place, and as a country, We've voted for this. Maybe we didn't know exactly what we voted for. And I was just thinking on my bike on the way in. Just there's a film that I was reminded of. It's called A Few Good Men. We'd be familiar with it, but thinking about that film, ultimately, in a way, it's a bit about. It's a bit about conscience, because it's a case where two guys are on trial for carrying out a punishment beating, in a military situation, with orders from the top, and when it's discovered that the orders did come from the top, they're still
liable.
They're still convicted of dishonourable duty and discharge from the army, and one of them turns to the other at the end and says, why? We did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But
they had.
This is the answer from the other guy. He said, yeah, we did. And you could see in the scene, the realization dawns on him, and he says, we were supposed to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what this is about. And, the point is that actually now, at the moment, I feel that the pro-life group are in a kind of a shock. They're in a kind of a spasm because it went through. And I think what's actually happening is as everything shakes through, and particularly like you give them an inch and they take a mile, like there's stuff that's been put into law that was never voted on. I'm absolutely convinced of that. That was never really permitted, by the Constitution. And the constitutional change has allowed it, but the people who voted for them, I'm sure, weren't
in that understanding.
Weren't saying that's like if a child is suffering, like for instance the classic thing I said, if there's a child being aborted and that we're not allowed to give it pain medication, that's the law now. And it's like, wow, who could have voted for that? I tell you, it won't be. I know who voted for it, and I won't be voting for them in the next election. That's for sure. But my point is that as the pro-life community comes out of that spasm, maybe we'll be able to do something about some of this stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think so. Yeah, and certainly. I thought it was very interesting to get the perspective of an outsider.
Absolutely, and that shock of him going, they want them to what? It's just amazing. Former abortion doctor Anthony Levatino talking to Steve Johnson. And Steve, thank you for coming in and just breaking it open for us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to our Spirit Radio podcast. Don't miss out. Subscribe today. Find out how at spiritradio.ie.